What is up? This is Graham Tuttle, the Barefoot Sprinter, and I'm going to cover a very common question that people have because I have it myself. What happens when your knees pop in deep knee flexion? Now, one place you'll probably notice this is in the ATG split squat. So that's the movement where your split stance, 1 foot forward, you're lowering all the way down and spreading out. So you're splitting, and it's a ass to grass split squat. Very popular thanks to Ben Patrick, and it's a great exercise, one of my favorites, probably one of the best for opening up the hip flexors. But when you're getting into deep knee flexion, it means your knees bending all the way down. A lot of times you can have pops, and that's uncomfortable. Now, the modern explanation, or the most common explanation, is called crepitus. Basically, it's just the snapping of tendons and ligaments as they slide past one another. If it doesn't hurt, it's not a big problem. I just find that to be a little unsatisfactory, especially because it feels kind of unsettling and feels uncomfortable. And so one of the things I like to think about is using pops and cracks and snaps and things like that as feedback that it might not be grooving smoothly. Now, that can be a soft tissue thing that's developed over years, meaning you have an asymmetry. For example, I used to stand like this where my one foot was turned out from an ankle sprain and just kind of like stood, my hips are shifted, all kinds of little weird things like that. Those things add up. And what happens at the hips, specifically as the femur sits into that acetabulum and that around the labrum, it gets stiff, especially if we sit and we're hunched over. So one of the things you want to think about is if I need to open that up, it's going to take a lot of time. Now, what you want to think about is when we get into loaded movement, this is where things fall back to natural patterns. It's not always what we want, especially as we get load. So most people find it very unsatisfactory just to do a very basic split squat all the way down, all the way up, focusing on quality. What they want to do is, oh, what's the standard? How much weight can I hold? And they try to get more and more. And so as you start to see that, you start to see the hip opening up in the back. You start to see an extension. You start to see an overarching in the back. You start to see all the compensations. And with that, if you haven't dealt with the soft tissue asymmetries or the issues on the front end, you will start to see a regression towards this type of like popping and snapping. That can be, not always, but that can often be a good sign that something's not smooth, especially if it's on one side and not the other. I know, for example, I would go and open up in this back hip and I would have a snapping of this sartorius, this long muscle, and I felt like this awkward pain at the hip or this awkward stretching. And so what that means is it's a sign to slow down. Now, one thing to note here that's important is that not all hips are the same. You can have deeper hip sockets, you can have shallower hip sockets, you can have anteverted or retroverted, meaning it's facing forward or away. This relates somewhat to genetics. But what I want you to think about is, even though that is important, it is something to focus on, if it is indeed a bony discrepancy, you can't really change that. It may just over time, because all bones are constantly shaping and forming, but it's not really something you control on a day-to-day. What you can focus on is the soft tissue. And oftentimes it's hard to tell if it's really a bony anatomy discrepancy or if it's just a soft tissue that's calcified over time that you can start to unwind and undo, especially if it's causing you pain or irritation or discomfort. So what you want to think about for that is these unilateral one-sided exercises like the ATG split squat. That's what I want you to focus on when you do this. It's not just strength training, it's also remodeling your body. Now, as we start to go and step all the way back, let's say you have one side that's a little weaker, what's really helpful is to grab something to take the balance component out. Something to hold on to, you can grab one on each side if you need to. And what you do is you elevate the front foot. Now what this does is it uses gravity with you, so it allows you to get in this deeper knee flexion because you're no longer having to open up this back hip flexor. I'm not putting as much load in a distended position at the hip flexor. I can simply shift forward. So what you want to start thinking about if you're having these popping and snapping is that there's a femur rotation abnormality. So meaning the head of the femur is sitting in the side of the acetabulum, and if the body shifted away or shifted forward, that's going to create some rotation. And what that does is it pulls on the muscles that run from the hip down to the knee. You've got all these quadricep, adductor, hamstring muscles that wrap around, and those are long muscles with long tendons. So what I want you to think about is as you get here, we start off at hip square. So if you can have a mirror or something, focus on, I'm sitting here, my hips are square forward. Now what I want you to focus on is core embraced and slowly loading into that at a very regressed angle. So you can use something to hold on to for balance. And your goal is to focus on core engaged, so if someone hits you in the stomach, you be firm. Your hips are forward, you're not rotating out, and your eyes are forward, so you're square. Now notice if you do that in an unregulated fashion, I tend to go here, and I want to get that last little bit. See, the problems happen when we try to compete, and we get so focused on adding more weight, adding more load. What we want to do is back off and start thinking, can I push the knee forward, can I pull the knee back? So for example, my tendency was here, so I needed to learn to pull the right hip back and shift the whole thing forward and ease into it, versus on my left side, the opposite. I have to push the hip forward and lean into that. So you start to see this, I'm playing with these variables. And so what I notice is if I take the weight off and elevate the front foot, I can ease into it and start to pay attention to Oh, when I get to where I'm weaker, or I want to open up, or I want to shut down, that's where the hip popping and snapping and at the knee can happen. So over time, as the muscles get stronger around the knee tends to decompress, meaning the fascia is a little bit more resilient, the synovial joint's a little bit healthier, all the ligaments and tendons have a little more space and bounce and give. Because what you notice is as I go here, you see that the knee is starting to stretch, and there's the ligaments at the knee and the tendons are starting to get a little more elastic and springy. They're starting to open up. That's what we want. But if we're stiff, it's going to feel irritated. So some of that popping is going to be easing into dehydrated and dehydrated and unhealthy tissues. That's going to be part of it. So we just want to focus on is picking apart the variables. Do I just need to get reps in without the weight and ease into this? Absolutely fine. Do I need to adjust the hips? Totally fine. Do I need to slow the movement down and to pay attention to what muscles are engaging? Can I use the feet? Start to dissect the movement like that. It's going to make a huge difference. As you get stronger, you can start to elevate the front foot a little bit lower. You can drop that down and pay attention to this thing. And what this does is it opens the body up. So whereas I'm here in a full knee flexion at this part of the movement, I'm easing in a little bit more. And you're going to start to notice different asymmetries, different tissues. What I really want you to focus on is driving that back foot into the ground, meaning the big toe stays extended. I don't want you to arc and open. I don't want to open up the foot. I want to keep that big toe in full extension. And I want to really drive this quad in and back. Flexing the quad like I'm punching that foot. I'm driving through. I'm punching myself forward. Now, if you think about this movement as though instead of just dropping down, I'm literally pushing through my back foot to drive my hips forward. I'm not turning out. I'm punching that back foot, driving through and pushing myself forward. That is going to start to create a lot more support and active engagement of this body, of your leg underneath your body. You're going to feel that real deep down the inside of this hip, that deep hip flexor on the internal rotation. Ooh, you can get there and hold in, relax, get all the way down. Remember, the last portion of this motion, the last 10%, the last 10 to 20 degrees of motion here, that's the valuable part. So you get down there, you relax, push back up. You might feel some popping as you ease into this, and you start to get stronger and you get a little bit more engaged. Now, I won't say that all the popping and snapping will completely disappear, but I will say that as I've slowed things down, taking the ego, I used to do this with 185, 200 pounds. I thought I was big and tough and getting all the way down. And then my knees didn't feel better and I was compensating and popping. So what I want you to focus on is using that as an example. Eventually you can get all the way down to the ground, all the way down, ease, start to get a little bit more range of motion. But what you're looking for here is that you are opening up this back hip flexor. If your knee's bending, you're compensating for stiffness here. And you're just starting to pull apart these pieces to literally pull apart your body. That's going to be your best bet. And now I think this is one of the best exercises you can do. If you take a little bit of time, pull the ego away and focus on the quality, you're going to make a huge improvement in this stuff. And slowly, your metric of success will be that the popping, the cracking, the snapping, the clicking tends to get better. That's what you want. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments or anything I should clarify on, put it in the section below. Otherwise, subscribe. See you next time.